Hi, I'm Dr. Tracey Marks, a psychiatrist, and I make mental health education videos. It turns out our brains are wired for social interaction, and when we don't get it, the brain changes and you lose nerve connections in certain parts of the brain.
The human brain is inherently social. The prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and hippocampus are heavily involved in processing social interactions. When these interactions are absent, the brain undergoes structural changes. For example, studies on loneliness show reduced gray matter volume in the prefrontal cortex, which is crucial for decision-making and emotional regulation. Cacioppo et al., 2014. Social isolation also reduces the production of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, which are essential for mood and cognitive function.
Before COVID, this issue was more noticeable in older people who lived alone, cut off from their families, and maybe unable to drive. Researchers saw that the social isolation hastened the age-related cognitive decline and was a risk for developing Alzheimer's disease.
Social isolation is a significant risk factor for dementia. A 2020 study published in the Journals of Gerontology found that socially isolated individuals had a 26% higher risk of developing dementia. This is likely due to a combination of reduced cognitive stimulation, increased stress, and inflammation, all of which accelerate brain aging. The lack of social engagement also deprives the brain of opportunities to practice skills like memory and empathy, which are critical for maintaining cognitive health.
But with COVID and the ensuing lockdown, we see the evidence of these brain changes in younger people.
The COVID-19 pandemic provided a natural experiment on the effects of social isolation. Younger people, who are typically less vulnerable to cognitive decline, reported symptoms like brain fog, anxiety, and depression. A 2021 study in Nature Neuroscience found that prolonged isolation during lockdowns led to measurable changes in brain structure, particularly in areas related to memory and emotional regulation. This highlights that social interaction is vital for all age groups, not just the elderly.
You may experience it as brain fog. Brain fog can be a lot of things, but in general, you can think and process information slower.
Brain fog is a nonspecific term that can stem from various causes, including stress, poor sleep, inflammation, or nutrient deficiencies. Neuroimaging studies show that brain fog is associated with reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex and default mode network (DMN), which are responsible for executive function and attention. For example, a 2021 study in brain behavior and immunity linked brain fog in long COVID patients to inflammation-induced disruptions in neural connectivity.
You can have trouble finding words. You can feel mentally tired and draggy even though you haven't done anything that's physically tiring. Why would social isolation do this? Your brain is made up of a network of nerves that connect to one another. The tighter the connections between the nerves, the better they are able to transmit signals from one nerve to another. Inflammation loosens these connections, as does social isolation.
Chronic inflammation is a key driver of brain dysfunction. Inflammatory cytokines like IL-6 and TNF-alpha can disrupt the blood-brain barrier and impair synaptic plasticity. Social isolation exacerbates this by increasing stress hormones like cortisol, which further promote inflammation. A 2017 study in Neuroplasticity found that socially isolated individuals had higher levels of inflammatory markers, which correlated with cognitive decline.
Social isolation affects your social cognition.
Social cognition involves skills like recognizing emotions, interpreting tone, and understanding others' perspectives. These skills rely on brain regions like the temporoparietal junction and medial prefrontal cortex. Without regular social interaction, these areas can atrophy. For example, a 2013 study in social cognitive and affective neuroscience found that socially isolated individuals performed worse on theory of mind tasks, which measure the ability to understand others' mental states.
This last skill is called theory of mind. Don't know why it's called that, doesn't quite make sense to me, but that's just in case you read that in the articles that I have referenced.
Theory of mind is the ability to appreciate that others have their own desires, goals, and intentions. Theory of mind is a cornerstone of empathy and social interaction. It develops in early childhood but requires ongoing practice to maintain. Research shows that individuals with limited social interaction, such as those with autism or long-term isolation, often struggle with theory of mind tasks.
These skills are learned very early on, but we need social interaction to maintain them. So some aspect of isolation is that you lose these skills because you fall out of practice.
A 2015 study in psychological science found that even short-term social isolation could impair this ability, highlighting the importance of regular social engagement.
But then there's the brain changes. In one of the studies that I referenced, researchers looked at structural MRI data from 32,000 people. That's a large study. The people who were socially isolated showed brain loss in the temporal lobes, frontal lobes, and hippocampus.
This large-scale study, published in Nature Communications in 2021, found that socially isolated individuals had reduced gray matter volume in the temporal lobes involved in memory, frontal lobes responsible for decision-making, and hippocampus critical for learning and emotional regulation. These changes were independent of age, suggesting that social isolation can harm the brain at any stage of life.
Your hippocampus is important for emotional memories, among other functions, and I've said before that people who are depressed have smaller hippocampi.
The hippocampus is vital for forming and retrieving memories, particularly emotional ones. Chronic stress and depression lead to elevated cortisol levels, which can shrink the hippocampus by up to 20% in severe cases. A 2016 meta-analysis in molecular psychiatry confirmed that hippocampal volume is significantly reduced in individuals with depression, contributing to symptoms like memory loss and emotional dysregulation.
Now, if you've watched many of my videos, you probably know that I don't like presenting negative information without a silver lining, and here it is. Even if you have brain loss from pandemic isolation, depression, long COVID, or something else that causes brain damage, your brain has the ability to rewire itself and strengthen loose connections. This ability is called neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to adapt and reorganize itself. It occurs through mechanisms like synaptic pruning, removing unused connections, and synaptogenesis, forming new connections. Activities like learning, exercise, and mindfulness can enhance neuroplasticity. For example, a 2011 study in PNAS found that London taxi drivers, who must memorize complex maps, had larger hippocampi than the general population, demonstrating the brain's capacity to grow with use.
So one solution to this problem of social isolation is to build up your cognitive reserve. Cognitive reserve is the mental buffer you have that lets your brain compensate and function even when you have reduced brain volume.
Cognitive reserve explains why some individuals remain sharp despite brain aging or damage. It's built through lifelong learning, social engagement, and mentally stimulating activities.
It's like having a backup power generator turn on when the power goes out.
A 2018 study in neurology found that individuals with higher cognitive reserve were 46% less likely to develop dementia, even if they had Alzheimer's-related brain changes.
And this is a real thing and explains why some people can get to their 80s and still be very sharp, while someone else at 68 is having trouble remembering important events. The more robust your cognitive reserve, the better you're able to function when exposed to stressors like isolation, environmental toxins, chronic stress, or anything else that's damaging to the brain. So you can think of cognitive reserve as your brain's physiological resilience. Here are 5 things that can increase your cognitive reserve: education, high levels of social interaction, cognitively challenging jobs.
These factors promote cognitive reserve by creating dense neural networks that can compensate for damage.
Activities that engage your brain, like crossword puzzles, reading, learning a new language, and learning to play an instrument. And then regular physical exercise, because exercise stimulates nerve growth, and nerve growth means new pathways and connections.
For example, a 2019 study in The Lancet found that individuals with higher education levels had a 40% lower risk of dementia. Similarly, jobs that require problem-solving and creativity, like engineering or teaching, are associated with better cognitive outcomes in later life.
I explain how that works in my video on how exercise changes your brain.
These activities stimulate multiple brain regions and promote neurogenesis. For instance, bilingual individuals have been shown to have thicker cortical areas in the frontal and parietal lobes, which are involved in executive function. A 2014 study in Annals of Neurology found that engaging in mentally stimulating activities delayed the onset of cognitive decline by up to 5 years.
Building up your cognitive reserve is something you do over a lifetime. It's not a one-and-done thing. You have to continuously engage your mind.
Exercise increases levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF, a protein that supports neuron growth and survival. Aerobic exercise, in particular, has been shown to increase hippocampal volume and improve memory. A 2011 study in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that older adults who walked regularly for a year increased their hippocampal volume by 2%, reversing age-related shrinkage. Cognitive reserve is cumulative, meaning it's built over decades. A 2020 study in JAMA Neurology found that individuals who engaged in lifelong learning and social activities had a 30% lower risk of dementia.
And education doesn't mean you have to go to Harvard or Oxford if you're in the UK. It's not about the kind of degree you get. It's about a commitment to learning and processing new information.
Formal education is just one way to build cognitive reserve. Informal learning, such as reading, attending workshops, or exploring new hobbies, is equally valuable. A 2017 study in Psychological Science found that curiosity-driven learning was associated with better memory and problem-solving skills, regardless of educational background.
When I was growing up without the internet, the way that you gained knowledge was to go to school or go to the library and look things up in encyclopedias. But now there is so much information available online that you can get a very advanced level of education from researching and reading from trusted online sources.
The internet democratizes access to knowledge. Platforms like Coursera, Khan Academy, and even YouTube offer high-quality educational content. A 2020 study in computers and education found that online learning could be as effective as traditional classroom instruction, provided learners are motivated and disciplined.
If you want to learn a new language, there's online courses for that. Then there's even free YouTube videos that can teach you a lot about a lot of different things. You just have to stay curious. This list that I just gave you isn't exhaustive. Diet, sleep, and self-care also factor in.
A Mediterranean diet, rich in fruits, vegetables, and healthy fats, has been shown to reduce the risk of cognitive decline by 35%. Martinez-Lapicina et al., 2013. Sleep is equally important, as it allows the brain to consolidate memories and clear toxins. Poor sleep has been linked to increased amyloid beta plaques, a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease.
But the one thing I like about this list is that most of the factors are within your control. You may not be able to control how challenging your job is. In fact, it may be a mind-numbing struggle for you to get through it every day.
Work that challenges the brain without overwhelming it is ideal. A 2016 study in occupational and environmental medicine found that jobs requiring complex thinking and problem-solving were associated with a 23% lower risk of cognitive impairment in later life.
But you can compensate for the hit that your brain takes from that kind of job by exercising before you go to work, if you can swing that schedule.
Exercise boosts blood flow to the brain, enhancing focus and productivity. A 2019 study in Frontiers in Psychology found that employees who exercised before work reported higher job satisfaction and better mental clarity.
Or working on mind puzzles during your lunch hour or when you get home. And by the way, don't mistake a stressful job for a mentally challenging one.
Chronic stress harms the brain by increasing cortisol levels, which can damage the hippocampus. A 2018 study in The Lancet Psychiatry found that high-stress jobs were associated with a 22% higher risk of stroke and cognitive decline.
Too much work with unrealistic deadlines can make your work stressful, but it doesn't mean it's mentally challenging in a positive way. Mentally challenging work should feel satisfying at some level, even if it's hard work.
While genetics play a role, lifestyle choices have a greater impact on cognitive health. A 2020 study in Nature Aging found that individuals who adopted healthy habits, for example, exercise, learning, socializing, had a 60% lower risk of dementia. Stay curious and keep learning. Curiosity drives lifelong learning, which is essential for cognitive health. A 2014 study in psychology and aging found that curious individuals had better memory and problem-solving skills, even in old age. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments section. And don't forget to subscribe for more.